We are now ready to begin the last panel of the conference. During this session, we will discuss the U.S. presidential election and their implications for Latin America and the Caribbean. This session will be moderated by Gabriela Frias, a business anchor for CNN en Español, a colleague in this world of journalism. Over to you, Gabriela. Qué bueno verte.
Igualmente, thank you so very much. Happy Friday to you all. Good morning. My name is Gabriela Frias. I've been with CNN for over 20 years. I'm from Mexico City. I'm coming to you live from Mexico, by the way. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you and exchange ideas. This is an open forum, so we'll go to a Q&A in a couple of minutes in regards to what's going on in the US, but Latin America. We've heard in the past couple of weeks what's at stake in this coming election in the United States on November 3rd. But we need to discuss also what's at stake for the countries in Latin America in the context of the pandemic, the health challenges, the economic collapse, the social consequences, and the type of relationship that's needed for the countries to pretty much restart their economies and avoid social consequences that might also destabilize the region. So it is a pleasure to talk to you about this topic. We will discuss the similarities and differences between the Democratic and Republican policies towards Latin America. So right now, I would like to introduce you to my two panelists. I'm delighted to talk to you both and welcome Julissa Reynoso, Ambassador Reynoso, partner at Winston Straw LLP, former U.S. ambassador to Uruguay, and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs in the United States. Julissa is a partner at this law firm. She focuses her practice on complex commercial litigation, regulatory enforcement, international arbitration. She's the former ambassador of the United States to Uruguay. She served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Central American, Caribbean, and Cuban Affairs. Welcome, Julissa.
Thank you, Gabby. Thank you.
Good morning to you. And Roger Noriega, good morning, visiting fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He coordinates the Latin American program. He's involved with Latin American affairs for over 2 decades. He's a very familiar face, same as Julissa. He's the former Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs and former U.S. Ambassador to the Organization of American States. He is also founder and managing director of Visión Américas, a firm that represents U.S. and foreign clients. Roger, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you both for this conversation, which I expect to be candid. So please, I think that one of the things that it's very important for us journalists in the next couple of hours, and I want to use it as the segue to begin our conversation, it's what's going to happen this weekend. This weekend, as you know, we will have an important election, and that is the election of the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, if there is enough quorum for this to happen. What is important in this election is that the President Trump's candidate, Mauricio Claver Carone, the current security advisor for Latin America at the White House, is President's top main candidate. Claver Carone has insisted that he has the support of 15 countries in Latin America, to say at least. But there's a number of former presidents and former secretaries and members of former employees of multilateral organizations that are thinking that this could not happen, Claver Carone's appointment at the IADB at the worst possible time. So is the election of Claver Carone a sign of things to come in a region that President Trump has not even set foot so far? I'm going to start with Julissa.
Thank you, Gabby. The position of the Trump administration with respect to the bank, as you noticed and noted, has been one very similar to the position it's taken with respect to Latin America and the Caribbean, which is essentially doesn't give it a whole lot of importance and deference versus what it has done in other parts of the world. The fact that you have a candidate from the United States that is a member of the White House and which is unprecedented, and who historically has taken quite firm position with respect to certain ideological criteria, and is clearly very much aligned with a extremely conservative and restricted view of how the United States should work with countries in the region is a problem. And you've heard what the Vice President Biden has said about the candidacy. He obviously doesn't agree with it, based on the principle that we should have someone there who is pragmatic and willing to work with the region as a whole and not be ideologically minded. You also have the important element that historically it's been, that position has been has worked with the region to allow and promote someone of the region to be the president. So this is unprecedented, uncharted territory, and frankly problematic on many fronts.
Let's just remember that the IADB has been presided over by a Latin American citizen, and that is the agreement, and it has been a historic, political agreement, so to speak, that it would be the case. Julissa, just to close your idea, your concept, what in practice can you see happening if Claver Carone is elected at the IADB? And aren't we overreacting and we should give him the benefit of the doubt?
You're correct. I hope I'm wrong. And he's not. His record does not translate into him being president of the IDB, assuming he gets the votes, in a manner that is ideologically, and that he sees the world in a black and white manner. I hope I am incorrect. That I hope I can one day come back to this platform and say, my goodness, I was wrong. This man is extraordinarily open-minded and really has the best interest of all citizens of Latin America and the Caribbean in mind. But the history, I'm a lawyer, so I have to look at the record, and the record does not show that till this point. But I do want to give the gentleman the benefit of the doubt.
Roger, how are you?
Doing very well, thank you. Appreciate for the opportunity to address this important issue. Obviously, the bank has an extraordinarily important role to play in the region, a region that is reeling from pandemia, from the economic shutdown in many of these countries, the very poorest being the hardest hit. And that's precisely the wheelhouse for the bank. And that's where it's the bank's extraordinary staff and leadership needs to step up to the challenge. And I think we need to stress the fact that Mauricio Claver Carone is the candidate of the United States, which has never held that position. I understand there's a gentleman's agreement, if you pardon the expression, ladies, about leaving this in the hands of the South American region, the leadership of the bank. But frankly, some of the other agreements in terms of regional balance haven't been respected. Mexico doesn't have the positions that it should have, the number of positions it should have in the leadership, nor a vice presidency, notwithstanding its 7% shares of the bank. So these agreements haven't been honored. But looking forward, I think Mauricio is a person who has, by the fact that he has been engaged in the day-to-day policymaking in the White House, a very good understanding of what's going on in the region and very real challenges that these governments are confronting, that their societies are confronting. And I think that, spending so much time operationally engaged in confronting these challenges in Central America, engaging in problems in Mexico, treating the issue of Venezuela has made him remarkably well informed about the events, the conditions in the region. And we can expect and hope, I should say, that if he wins the presidency, which is quite likely, he will tap the intelligent women and men from throughout the region to staff these positions, to let the professionals in the bank do their job, that maybe he brings fresh ideas, maybe some accountability, and that this would be a constructive development, not only for the bank, but for the Americas as a whole.
You don't really think you can, because there's a big risk of it becoming the IADB too ideological?
I think the problem with this whole confrontation over the voting is that it is ideological. It is based on the fact that Mauricio comes not only from a U.S. government, but a Republican administration, and more to the point, a Trump White House. And so when his opponents have said, we haven't advocated for supporting Laura Chinchilla, who's a perfectly professional, capable person, an alternative. They've said, let's put the vote off until after the US elections. So it's so nakedly ideological and political. And I think that's unhealthy. On the other hand, he's going to have to deliver the goods at an incredibly perilous time for the Americas, when we're facing fantastic challenges. And I think he'll step up to the plate. He's an intelligent guy. You understand from the Trump administration, these are the people that have doubled the financing available in international development by the reforms they made of the now Development Finance Corporation. We have now $60 billion, double the lending available. And that's the White House that delivered on that. And so I think that I'm hoping for the very, very best, expecting the very best.
Let's hope that that's the case. There's a story in Bloomberg News about this upcoming election, and it talks about Mexico and Mexico's participation in the bank, and how possibly the Minister of Finance might be at the meeting, which would imply that there would be enough quorum to get him elected. But my question to you both is, should countries that did not favor Claver Carone for this candidacy be afraid of what's to come if President Trump gets reelected and Claver Carone is instated in the presidency of the IADB? What do you think, Julissa? We know President Trump. We know we know behaviors, and there's a pattern of behaviors and reactions that lead me to ask you this question.
Well, the countries that have taken a position with respect to this candidacy in particular have presented and supported other people, which are people who are quite credible and have their own standing. And it's not just an arbitrary opposition for the sake of being opponents of the Trump administration. I do think it was healthy and wise to have several people being put forward and considered by diverse set of countries in the region with good standing, and countries that are significant players like Mexico, like Argentina, of the actual capital of the bank. So for the sake of the actual bank itself and the ability of the bank to actually function, whoever gets elected, be that Mauricio or someone else, is going to have to work with those countries that had other candidates, if you will, in the mix. So one thing is the Trump administration, which my position hopefully won't be there after January. And the other reality is that in order for the bank to do its work, it's going to have to work in terms of not only personnel, but in terms of lending, and especially in light of the tremendous impact of COVID in the region with all these players. And some of the countries, Mexico and Argentina in particular, that put forth another candidate that is not obviously Mauricio, are significant players and capital contributors and to the bank. So they will be necessary in order to actually allow the bank to function in the way it's supposed to, which is for the benefit of the people of Latin America and the Caribbean, and towards a just and equitable development goal. So I think it's one thing is the ideological bent of the president, which might still be there come January, but the other is the reality of the bank's functioning in that regard.
Let me close this topic by asking Roger, adding, I've interviewed a number of, former IADB, World Bank, economists and experts, and even former President Laura Chinchilla. The one thing that they highlight about this moment is that even the region reflected, division. And there is division, ideological division in the region. So my question to you is, how is this going to be playing out in the context of the US election, considering we're talking about differences between the Trump administration and Joe Biden and the Democratic offer and vision of Latin America?
Well, I think that there is an essential consensus in the US vis-a-vis Latin America and the role of the bank. And I think there's some alarm on the side of the Democratic leadership. We've seen Senator Patrick Leahy take a prominent role in opposing this candidacy of Mr. Clavercarone. But I think that he will have a period of time to demonstrate his commitment to the issues, to demonstrate a collegial style. That you cannot be imperious as president of the Inter-American Development Bank. You have to deal with a staff that has its very established professional views of development issues and financing and accountability. And you have a board of governors that the president of the bank responds to. I think Mauricio Clavercarone would serve himself well if he presents a very clear agenda, a strategy, and a collegial style, openness, puts together a team that has regional representation, and that is the way that he can not only win the confidence of folks from the region, but potentially the next administration, which might be in Democratic hands. So he has a real challenge on his hands. He's going to have to demonstrate a lot of intelligence and reasonableness and a collegial leadership style.
Thank you both for addressing this issue, which is happening in this weekend. Coincidentally, let's move on to immigration, which is a much more dense topic and that has a number of subtopics that we need to cover. I would start with asking you to just point at the similarities or differences that you find between the Democratic and the Republican policies. I know it's complex, but let's just set the scene of what you're seeing so far, Roger.
Well, it is extraordinarily complicated, and let me distinguish, if I could, between the traditional Republican positions on immigration, which generally reflect the U.S. Public opinion in favor of immigration, recognizing the contributions that immigrants make to our society and historically and every single day. And a recognition, for example, in the case of the Dreamers, of the very compelling humanitarian arguments in favor of these folks. Practical ideas about border security, not an obsession with a physical barrier, which they have their place in terms of territorial integrity, but they are by a wall by no means is either practical or sends the right signals in terms of our economic interdependence. And so Republicans have traditionally recognized that and been receptive to regularizing the situation of people who are here illegally, finding a path where they can stay here and participate in the U.S. economy and knit our countries together. The United States with our Mexican, Central American, and other neighbors. So that's a difference. The Republican position has been sort of tossed aside by the Trump administration. The rhetoric has been very divisive, polarizing, provocative. And it undermines the ability of this administration to sustain the kinds of things we need to do in terms of border security, because everybody assigns the very worst motives to what this administration has been trying to do. We can't have open borders. We can't have every Central American traversing Mexico on their way to the United States. Frankly, the Mexicans don't want that. In public opinion, Mexicans want to send their own military to the border to protect themselves. And so we have to, I think, remind people what are our traditional points of view on immigration, and that has to come from Congress. There has to be some leadership from Congress as they work in a bipartisan fashion with Trump administration or with the new Biden administration to finally address some of these essential problems with our immigration system.
Lisa.
So I agree with Roger. We have history in the United States of really coming together around real comprehensive immigration reform. The last real reform took place in the 80s under President Reagan, obviously a Republican leader. And it's shocking that that has so evolved and gotten so complicated this day, where the Republican Party is seen as so detached from that moment. They claim Ronald Reagan for so many things you would wonder and wish they would claim him for that one too. But this is a broader kind of problem. It's not just an immigration problem. It is an issue of President Trump's position with respect to inciting race and ethnicity here as a means of getting elected and sustaining power. And he started his messaging around the border and Mexicans at the beginning of his campaign back when he was running against Secretary Clinton, and has continued that rhetoric in different versions of it, some more subtle than others, with respect to people who are, in his mind, foreign or different. So that the immigration conversation now has become quite racialized, courtesy of the Trump administration. In terms of how we move forward, we have, I think, members of Congress that are both Democrats and Republicans who have shown interest in really trying to fix this problem. And for us here in the United States, you have the domestic issue, which is the people who are here already, who need to be regularized, both DACA recipients, but also people who currently do not have proper documentation. And that's the type of rulemaking that took place in the 80s that we need to look back and also do it again. And then you have the issue just on the border itself and the lack of appropriate enforcement in the sense of enforcement, using US law as it is, the Constitution and immigration laws, especially around asylum, to treat people with the dignity and the humanity that is already codified in our laws. So currently we're doing so many things on the border with Mexico, from the stay Mexico policy to these tent courts that have been set up on the border with Mexico that violate a host of US rules, including basic due process protections. So that is, one is just simply enforcing US law, which and respecting US law and our Constitution, which we are currently in many ways not doing on the US border, but also fixing the problem we have internally in terms of incorporating all those people that are already here, assuming people pay their taxes, do not break any criminal code. They should be able to stay here and go through a process of normalization like we've done in the past. This is not unprecedented. We've done it in the past. And then third piece of the story, of the component, is really working with the countries in Latin America, Mexico, Central America, places in the Caribbean where people are coming, to make sure they have resources to be able to develop properly so that people don't have to migrate, don't have to come here to begin with.
There are a couple of topics that we should cover here. Context is everything. And this situation of the pandemic reminds me of what happened in 2008, 2009 with the other crisis. I'm mentioning context because we have at least 11 million people at least who are unemployed in the US. And given that context, do you really think there will be political room to move ahead and do what Joe Biden say is right in terms of the dreamers, in terms of immigration reform, in terms, will there be the proper environment? We've seen in the past that these have been promises that are not being, President Obama was not able to keep, for example, but the economic context is also a source of pressure in the US. And the same thing goes for Central America. Are we really not thinking that we might see new caravans? And Joe Biden Biden when he was vice president, he pretty much knows what happens with the unaccompanied minors getting into the southern border. So what are the lessons to learn from these two, instances that I'm describing?
Who should go first?
Julissa.
Okay. So I want to make sure, Gabby, I caught your question. So lessons learned from the prior mistakes, is that one piece? But also, yes, but also given the economic,
exactly.
right, given the economic situation we're living here, how reasonable is it to try to move forward with an immigration policy that's
realistic is it?
How
realistic is it? Yeah.
Well, so as many people here have experienced firsthand, a lot of we have realized that a lot of our essential workers, as legally defined and defined by policy, are actually migrants, immigrants, and some of them, including are undocumented immigrants. So there is a new focus, I think, by most thinking people in this country that in order for us to survive and move forward as a country, we need to be able to treat undocumented people and migrants generally who have been, at this point, during this last 7 months of the pandemic, essential for our food, for our healthcare, for the delivery of our goods, a host of items that I think are, and basic services that I think we've now come to realize are mostly handled by immigrants. So,
but Julissa, forgive me
yes.
for interrupting you. They've
Yes.
always been essential. The only thing is, how much are we just calling them essential? But but they will remain the same in the context of immigration reform, etc. Forgive me.
No, I know that as an immigrant, I know I'm essential, but but it's more in the essence that there is a recognition by political class that there has to be a connection between our economic sustainability and our basic kind of human development here as a country and progress in terms of labor, right? And normalizing, regularizing all those people that in the past, for the most part, were considered kind of an afterthought of in the immigration reform. Was really an issue of we have to be humane. We have to treat people kindly and make sure they're integrated properly into the country. And that is something that we must do. But there's now, I think, an increasing awareness that it's not just a humanitarian issue. It is a labor issue that we have to also manage. And so in that regard, making the case for a comprehensive immigration reform come next year, if we have a proper functioning government, I think will be a lot more politically acceptable because of those realities than maybe appears to be normally in the case that if we do have an economic situation that is quite complex, but the solution to that economic circumstance and that economic crisis we're living, it involves allowing immigrants and undocumented immigrants in particular to be able to become regularized U.S. residents or citizens moving forward.
I don't want to. I just want to say that we're preaching to the converted, so to speak, when we talk about these topics. And the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and many other business entrepreneurial associations in the U.S. are exactly calling on this. The U.S. will lose competitiveness if we don't see them differently and move and accordingly. But Roger, do you see it as easy as it has the needle been moved so much as to consider this almost a done deal in the next couple of years if there's not a Trump administration? And if there is, what are you seeing?
Well, the composition of the Congress is going to make a bit of a difference in this discussion going forward, obviously. I think it's a great question. The last time that we came fairly close to pushing a deal of this kind through over the goalpost was the Gang of Eight putting together a comprehensive plan that included regularizing people, who would take certain measures to pay fines of some kind in order to be eligible to participate in programs where they would have a legal status here. And that deal crashed and burned because some people preferred to have the issue as a divisive issue, then find a solution. And that's, by the way, it's not just one party or another, but frankly, former President Obama, when he was a senator, supported killer amendments to that legislation, and so now years later, we probably wish that we would have kept reason together and push that to fruition. Another issue, it's frankly, I take very personally the rhetoric of the Trump administration, which is why I am no longer a Republican. But I am a conservative, and I also see the realities of border security and all of that. But we have to recognize that it's not people like us, who have good positions in government or in law firms and all, whose wages are driven down by illegal immigration. And the other part of that equation is there's no immigrant, legal or otherwise, who wants to be cheated out of a fair wage. So we need to focus on those issues so that there are fair wages for everybody. And then the working class of the United States doesn't feel that they're being undercut by these people who are coming in and being exploited by what? By the private sector in the United States. I mean, I've had brought many conversations to an end when I ask some of these small businessmen, do you pay a fair wage to some of these people that are living here illegally? And they don't want to talk about that anymore. But the fact is, we can and have to strive for this kind of solution. I think it will be very tough with the Trump administration, but the president himself has offered some deals that then he's undercut by his staff. But he's offered some deals in meetings with the leadership, putting lots of things on the table, and then the negotiations are undercut by staff and the president backtracks. So, I think, frankly, and I'm not being partisan or anything, I think that they would have a better shot at moving legislation if Vice President Biden were elected president, and you start from that position, somebody in the White House who's willing to work with all views in Congress to try to reach some kind of legislation that would go forward and start to put our house in order.
And Gabby, let me just, if I may, just to supplement Rogers's comments. Vice President Biden has clearly already announced that if he's elected, there will be in the first days, months of his presidency, a bill to Congress to deal with these issues that we're discussing. Obviously, there's also, in a more immediate short-term order, there are executive issues, rules that he has in his immediate domain that he can enforce to, at minimum, try to manage the situation and the irregularities of the way that our asylum rules and our border protection and border processes are being managed right now. That can also take place within the short term in a Biden presidency.
And Gabby, very quick,
please.
This is something where President Biden would have to be very careful, because I saw once when incoming President Clinton talked about the terrible treatment of Haitian immigrants, and the next thing you know, he had a wave of illegal immigrants, people crossing and taking dangerous risks. Same thing happened with President Obama when he did the things with DACA and started to, prosecutorial discretion or whatever. And then the coyotes read this, they read the fine print, and they overwhelmed our border. And he had a significant crisis precisely because it sent the signal that we were going to let everybody stay. We have to have secure borders, and it breaks your heart when you see people making this dangerous trek, teenage girls being forced to take birth control pills so they can abuse them along the way, and then use them, and I have had testified before members of Congress who are the biggest opponents of human smuggling, passionate opponents of human smuggling, who then say, we got to let all these people come in. Well, these are people being smuggled in by coyotes who are gaming our system, overwhelming our enforcement measures by putting small children in with the people they're smuggling in. So we have to be super, super careful, be sort of, open-hearted but hard-headed in how we go about some of these measures.
Thank you.
Just to, sir, reply, if I may, as a good litigator, I have to reply to the reply. Roger is correct in the sense that we have to be careful about the message. The message is not everybody, no borders, by no means. It's essentially applying U.S. law as it is, and right now it's not being applied because we're not letting anyone in under most circumstances. If you go to the border with Mexico, it is a humanitarian kind of embarrassment for the United States. It's looking at people and people being able to present their case, and the United States being able to review the case and apply asylum laws. If they qualify, they should be allowed to come into the United States if they qualify.
Thank you both. Let me move to the second part of the question that confused Julissa, and I apologize for that. And that was covering Central America, just because I remember those days when President Obama and Vice President Biden were dealing with exactly the crisis of the children, the unaccompanied minors that were at the southern border. The reason why I'm asking this is, as you know, Vice President Biden traveled to Central America. He put together this Plan para la Prosperidad with the help of the IADB, and to some experts, this is a so-so strategy that it really did not work well. But specifically, my question to you is in regards to the accountability of the Central American governments and in general of the governments that receive the funds. We had corruption in Guatemala. We had, a number of accusations against, President Juan Orlando Hernandez as his brother, of course, and the question for you is, what do we need to do different so that the populations in Central America do feel that there's a benefit of any strategy that is, worked with the governments of Central America when you have these very troubling problems of corruption in that region? Roger.
So, by the way, you nailed it. Thank you very much for doing this, because first off, the Plan for Prosperity that was implemented by, conceived by Biden, and by the way, an awful lot of the work being done by professionals at the Inter-American Development Bank. Excellent program. By the time U.S. programs started to kick in, President Trump cut them. So, I'm not going to prejudge the Biden strategy because it was cut off before we actually, and it was making an impact in terms of reducing illegal immigration from certain communities. Some of these measures that were taken in terms of vis-a-vis gangs and all of this were having an effect, and we cut them off. And so we have to have accountability by the governments. That's the other critical point. We signed CAFTA. Well, the Congress is going to have to impose conditions. Bottom line, we need to respect those conditions. We signed CAFTA 10 years ago. Arguably, those countries are worse off today because the local governments, national authorities, and the private sectors didn't do the hard work of retooling their economies and consciously pushing the benefits of this trade to people from all walks of life, including consciously to the people living on the margins. It didn't happen. And frankly, we sort of dropped the ball in not pushing it in the last 10 years to require that. But we certainly shouldn't be cutting slack to governments in Central America today because they are signing agreements or doing things that discourage illegal immigration, but then break all of the rules in terms of the separation of powers, respect for human rights, accountability, corruption. we cannot countenance these abuses by these national governments and then pretend that we can apply a band-aid of terms of financing for the private sector or a trade agreement. It's not going to happen unless you have just government. And so there has to be strict accountability, and we have to, and we need an aid program to go along with the financing. It can't just be private sector-led growth. You have to have the kind of economic engagement, and we can use the bank in this way, in certain ways, and with technical assistance and USAID to help create a demand for better government, and to empower people politically so they can insist that their governments do a better job.
Julissa, we're going to take questions from the audience, but if you want to add anything, if you can be brief this time. We need to add trade, and we need to add climate change, which I know is so important also for the region. Go ahead.
Right. The commitment by Vice President Biden for the region, for Central America in particular, Northern Triangle, and specifically because of the migration focus there, is a more robust investment. Not just that he started the Obama, Biden presidency, White House had a commitment. It was not allowed to fully blossom, if you will, because President Trump came and got rid of a lot of those programs and the level of assistance. Under President Biden, you will see a lot more economic investment in Central America. That said, there will also be a whole lot more accountability and rules that will have to be implemented for governments in the region and the private sector as well, to ensure that they are being transparent and they're using the funds and the programs to benefit the people of those countries and not benefit themselves.
Thank you, Julissa. So now we're opening the session to Q&A. Go ahead.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you to our wonderful panelists. We will take now some questions from our audience. You can submit your questions directly on the platform of our Q&A page. Let's begin with the first question. It arrives from Betty Sedok Dalbert. She writes, do you believe that under Vice President Biden, U.S. foreign policy would be significantly different from the Trump administration? How? And particularly, she's interested in the role, according to your perspective, of China in engaging or undermining liberal democratic values in the region. Nos llega esta pregunta de Betty Sedok Dalbert.
This is a question from Betty Sedok Dalbert. In a Biden presidency, would U.S. foreign policy be significantly different from the Trump administration, and particularly the role of China and its influence on the region, undermining liberal democratic values? Gabriel?
To start answering the question, I'm going to ask you to be brief so that we can include more observations on your part on trade and climate change. Julissa?
It's going to be a whole other universe under President Biden. He has a record already working with the region. He cares about the people of the region. There are at least 4 issues, I think, that are going to be priorities for President Biden in the short term. One, working with the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean to ensure some proper response, both on the economic and health side with respect to COVID. The second issue is involving kind of how to manage the questions of migration, both domestically in the United States, both on the trans-border question as well, related to the migration problems. Third is climate change, and we hope to speak to further, that impacts primarily a lot of the island states of the Caribbean, but also working with the Brazilians and ensuring that we can really properly kind of be partners with respect to the way the Amazon's being treated. And then fourth, we're going to have a significant kind of set of issues involving certain countries that have real political and humanitarian crisis, places like Venezuela, but also the political kind of dynamic that's always been part of our history, or at least recent history, with Cuba, and places like Nicaragua, and also the ongoing development challenges in Haiti. So, but there is a plan. And there is a framework to handle this with respect, but also with pressure and accountability for the countries in the region. Right now, Trump sees the world, Latin America, as basically just as a political transactional matter, whereby his focus is talking about certain countries, primarily Venezuela and Cuba, and how he can use that rhetoric to get votes in Florida. And it's related. Second is, how do you use the border with Mexico to get votes the rest of with his base? So that's the duality of the Trump vision for Latin America and its vast limitations.
Gabby,
go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. I think one of the reasons that President Trump is doing surprisingly well among Latinos in Florida in a recent poll, I think is because there's a concern that Biden will sort of snap back to the policy of unilateral concessions to the Cuban dictatorship, which has, since President Obama tried to normalize relations with them, microwaved our diplomats and destroyed Venezuela. And so, I certainly hope that they fine-tune that approach. I'll also add that there will be a change, hopefully soon, in the Trump administration if Ambassador Carlos Trujillo can be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. He's a guy who has performed rather well at the OAS. He's a thoughtful person. He brings new ideas to the table. You haven't had a Senate confirmed political appointee in that job for years. And what's important is you need somebody that's going to drive the bureaucracy forward, give some leadership, and build on some of what the Trump administration has done now in the context of America Crece, this growth for the Americas, these agreements that are, address essential common objectives and commit billions of dollars in financing to do these things. And so I'm hoping for the very best with Carlos, and yes, with Mauricio Clavercarone as the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, somebody who's been very conversant in all these issues, who's helped shape these policy responses, and that those folks can work together for the good of the region.
But very briefly to you both, bye-bye sanctions on Cuba, bye-bye sanctions on Venezuela, and re-engagement also with Havana and Nicaragua. What are you seeing there? Very briefly, please.
Bye-bye, nothing. There's very unlikely you will have a Biden presidency where you will not have robust tools being used against, and by tools I mean sanctions. First of all, with respect to Cuba, it's the law. So it's, that's a whole other set of challenges and realities that any government has to face. With respect to Venezuela and other places where you may deem that there are significant, not only political issues, you have in certain instances criminal issues as well that require U.S. enforcement of sanctions. So I do not think that is at all on the table. What is on the table, ensuring that whatever we're doing, be that sanctions or any other policy, is actually going to have a result and an impact that we want. And currently, the way that the Trump administration has been handling sanctions has been just throwing sanctions at countries without really seeing any improvement in the domestic situation in those countries, and or increasing humanitarian problems for the people of those countries. So it's just a political gesture of pain is not enough to get for the interest of U.S. policy. U.S. policy on our national security should see results, positive results, for our benefit with respect to the sanctions and whatever other other policy we're putting forward, and not just punish countries for the sake of punishing them.
Well, Gabby, there's an important issue I don't want to slip by, and it's not a divisive and it's not a tit for tat debate point. I think there's common ground on the China issue. A lot of the very tough measures that the President Trump's imposing on China now, Chuck Schumer has been advocating for a decade. And you have bipartisan legislation introduced by Senator Bob Menendez and Senator Marco Rubio that would push a third of the $60 billion in financing to the Americas to integrate our supply chains, to kind of harmonize our policies and our procedures, and to really invigorate these economies, to pull us together, not necessarily vis-a-vis China, but at least addressing the need for more secure supply chains.
Thank you. Let's go to more questions.
One question regarding to Venezuela. Donald Trump has a good relation with Vladimir Putin and also with President Erdogan of Turkey. Well, we have seen a very good interest in Venezuela, particularly from this administration. If President Trump wins and not faced with re-election, do you think that he will lose interest in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua? Vemos una buena relación del presidente Trump con Vladimir Putin o con el presidente Erdogan de Turquía.
We see that President Trump has a good relationship with Vladimir Putin and Erdogan. If he wins the next elections and is not facing re-election, which has to do with the vote in Florida, do you think the president will lose interest in Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua?
Sure, I'll jump in. So I think President Trump has an abiding concern about Venezuela and Cuba. I think, he found some of his most enthusiastic backers when he was initially running from the Cuban American community. And he talks very fondly about that routinely. And then I also think he knows a lot of people from Venezuela because of his presence in South Florida, and really people that go to Doral, which is like the center for Venezuelan immigration. And he sees that these are extraordinarily decent people run out of their own country by a diabolical narco regime. And I think he does have an interest in doing that. But I think he's also very impatient about a strategy that has not produced results. And I think it's because it's a fatally flawed strategy that put too many eggs in the basket of an opposition that is expert at delivering concessions to the regime and hasn't really, in a purposeful way, stood up and confronted the problems. And so the regime has gradually bled away almost the opposition and has managed to control the last 18 months of engagement by the Trump administration to push change, and they managed to hold on to power. And so it will fall to a guy like Carlos Trujillo and his team to retool that Venezuela policy, find something that's going to produce real results.
Julissa, any plan B that you're foreseeing if President Trump gets reelected?
I foresee that if President Trump is reelected, he will soon not really care much about Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and all the other countries that he uses to activate his electoral base.
Okay. Do we have more questions?
Oh yeah, plenty. Let's talk about Brazil. This arrived from Dulce Maria Pereira. She asked, how do you believe U.S. foreign policy to Brazil will change under the Biden presidency? President Trump counts on total submission of Bolsonaro and his government, sharing also private commercial interests, such as concerning chloroquine. Desde Brasil, asumimos, llega esta pregunta de Dulce Maria
From
Pereira.
Brazil, we have a question from Dulce Maria Pereira. How do you think that the U.S. foreign policy vis-a-vis Brazil would change under a Biden presidency? The Trump presidency has the complete submission, as our viewer has said, of Bolsonaro and his government sharing private trade interests and ideology.
I'm wondering what might President Bolsonaro feel if Donald Trump doesn't get reelected. That also is a very interesting point. Who'd like to start? Roger, Julissa, whomever.
I'm happy to start. I think the question had a lot, said a lot, which is the reality of this relationship, which is very one-dimensional and very much a relationship of convenience, and really the White House looking not properly engaging with the second most important in terms of size country in the region in a robust and kind of elaborate and nuanced way. Not only is the president-to-president relationship important, you also have a whole lot of other actors in the country or in Brazil that should be considered, including the opposition, including human rights activists, including the business sector and the like. And the fact that in the case of Bolsonaro, that his mismanagement of the pandemic, his now targeting of opposition leaders and human rights activists and the like, it is something that we need to call out and hold them accountable like we do people in other places that may be less friendly to us, right? So I think we have to be consistent as a government and treat have a standard that is applicable to all leaders in the region and in the world, and not just conveniently look away when a leader like Bolsonaro acts recklessly with respect to the way he's handling certain matters, especially the pandemic, but also handling of issues involving the Amazon, because he is more than willing to accommodate certain of our positions and essentially jumps every time we tell him to. So that is something that will change under a President Biden.
But interestingly enough, I just wanted to add and ask Roger for your opinion. Interestingly enough, there's this extra federal money that's been given out, to almost, if not half the country, at least close to half of the country, and that has helped him in the national polls. And there's a local election upcoming. So how do you, include that into the question and in your answer, Roger?
Well, there is the Bolsonaro in theory and Bolsonaro in practice, and they bear resemblances in negative ways. But when it comes to building a governing style and operating, it's sort of a weak game. He doesn't have a very deep team. But frankly, this is a great opportunity for the United States, where you see someone who does not have a Brazilian president, who does not necessarily have a negative opinion of the United States. As a matter of fact, in the case of Bolsonaro, has a positive opinion, not only of the United States, but of the US president. And so I think that they've not accomplished what they could have in terms of bringing our economies together in appreciable ways that would be adopting certain positions in the region that would be able to kind of drive the continental consensus to do a better job in responding to a real threat, which is China, which has exercised mercantile, exploitive policies and done terrific environmental damage in this hemisphere. So we should have these great American powers working together to bring our region together to be more competitive with the rest of the world. That was what we would have hoped for. But frankly, to be fair, this COVID thing has swamped all of these visions, all of these efforts, and whether they've handled them positively or poorly the reality is these economies have taken a beating, and people who might have had a vision for economic reorganization, reintegration, all this had to take a backseat to just simply trying to keep people alive.
Yeah. Forgive me for interrupting. We only have 5 more minutes. I'm just wondering also if we will see, if in a Biden presidency, we will see the kind of pressure that we saw coming from Europe, from France against President Bolsonaro for, the fires at the Amazon, for example. But let's move to the last set of questions before I take the audience time with mine.
Okay, one last question then. Luis Rigo Araniva. He asked, how can we guarantee or increase more participation of women and young voters in the democratic processes and participation processes in the countries of the region? Luis Rico Araníbar nos pregunta cómo se puede garantizar.
He asks us how we can guarantee greater participation of women and young people in participatory processes and elections in the region.
From the U.S. perspective, obviously, we will have our own internal challenges of making sure young people and women are properly integrated into the political process. We've had certain Latin American countries are much more progressive in terms of that than the United States. So maybe we're not the best people to preach about it. But let's step aside from that notion for a second. I think having people, role models who inspire, who especially, obviously, if you're a woman, as we are, having other women leaders who we see have advanced and been successful and been respected and have been allowed and given opportunity to really participate in the political process and grown in it, I think inspires other women to do the same. So that ability to really promote women and allow women in their rightful place in the democracy, it's something that, you know, either through either role models and or, you know, in certain instances, you have countries that actually have generated rules where you have women have to make up X amount of the parliament or some other representative body. I think that would be quite interesting to look at from the younger perspective. Again, I think young people need to be motivated to understand that their participation is meaningful and it's really important in order to feed the change that they want. But if they continue to vote or not vote, and there's no difference in who's in charge, then I don't know to what extent people are going to be motivated to do much. And that's what's partly what the challenge we're facing here in the United States.
Roger?
I think that when it comes to like the political class, women, they know which doors to push open, and they'll manage, right? Where I think we can make a difference is on economic empowerment. Programs that consciously empower women-owned businesses, smaller micro enterprises to small enterprises to others. We can favor them. We can give them preferences. And I think that that's both something that the Inter-American Development Bank does and that this Development Finance Corporation under the US government does, to consciously empower people, women, so that they can amass, tend to their own needs, start to build wealth, create jobs, become important economic actors, at least being able to defend themselves, and then make a more meaningful contribution in terms of changing the history of the country. But so I'm in Bogota right now, and I had an opportunity to meet with Marta Lucia Ramirez, the vice president, who is pushing some very innovative ways, precisely to empower women. And she's deeply committed to this, and that's what you need. You need to have those powerful women, consciously, in a very real way, do practical things to empower women economically and to ensure that their voice is heard in the political sphere as well.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Julissa. Thank you, Roger. Thank you for the audience questions. Also, I would say, and I will only add, private sector is so important in the US. We have a number of examples of, many companies that are already, getting engaged in trying to bring young people also into the voting booths in the coming elections. So I'm assuming that's also a good answer for, Latin America. I am so thrilled about this opportunity. So thrilled to have spoken to you in this length, an hour and a half, and thank you for your audience also for the questions. You all have a great weekend, a great day, and let's see what happens, by the way, during the weekend.
Thank you,
Gabriela, and thank you, Roger and Julissa, for such an amazing panel. And with that, our annual CAF conference draws to a close. On behalf of CAF, the Development Bank of Latin America, the Inter-American Dialogue, and the Organization of American States, I would like to thank everyone for joining us for this 24th year of the CAF conferences, as we make history hosting our first ever virtual conference. Over the course of the past 3 days, we were able to exchange ideas and analysis with experts and practitioners on a range of topics and issues vital to our hemisphere, from climate change to human rights to health system, public health system, from digital gaps and the needs to fill them, and also about democracy and this election in the US this coming November 3rd. Thank you as well to our wonderful media partners, El País, America Economía, and the international news channel NTN 24. We look forward to having you join us next year. Stay safe, and thank you once again for tuning in.